Welcome back everybody, my name is Robert Doman, and in this video I'm going to be counting down the top 10 ways to play your own homebrew Game Boy games. So GB Studio is a way of bringing your game ideas to life on the Game Boy. If you didn't already know, it's a drag and drop game engine that lets you export games for the web or as ROMs and even as .pocket files, but we'll get to that later. And before I begin, I want to give an honorable mention to the Switch. Last year, Nintendo released a library of Game Boy games to play on the Switch, but as of right now, there isn't an actual easy or legitimate way to play your own games on the console, unfortunately. However, I've actually teamed with the publisher Caracal Games to get Ticket Racing 2 onto the Switch, so although it is possible, I don't think it's the best way that you can play your homebrew Game Boy games. So you can currently pre-order Ticket Racing 2 from the Nintendo eShop, and when it's released, there should also be a free demo available. So number 10 of the best ways to play your own homebrew Game Boy games is by running the game in GB Studio. As a developer, quickly making and testing changes is paramount. So although this is at the bottom of the list, it's arguably the most important, okay? While in GB Studio, all you have to do is press the arrow at the top right of the screen to build and run the game. And then after a small wait, a window will pop up and you'll be playing your game. It's as simple as that. And you can easily just make changes and press play, and it's invaluable. At number 9, I have itch.io. This website is an absolute treasure trove of indie game wonder, and it's actually where I originally found GB Studio. By building your game for the web in GB Studio, you can then upload the game here, and the world can see and play it. Just like these here, there's, you know, loads of games made in GB Studio, so if you need inspiration, here it is. If you want to join these guys, you can do that very easily. It's completely free to make an account and upload, so if you have never heard of Itch, you definitely need to check it out. Each game page can be customized, so this one, obviously I've got a nice checkered background. I've got a link to my website where you can buy the cartridge. I've got a description of how or what the game's about, and also controls of how to play. Got screenshots, and also the game made in the web version. It's also possible to sell your games on this website and also ask for donations. You can upload a game before it's done as a prototype or a demo. So yeah, you definitely should check this out if you haven't already, if you don't know that itch.io exists. At number 8, above itch.io, I have PC Emulation. When you build your game as a ROM in GB Studio, you can use that file and open it in an emulator on your computer. I use this one here, BGB, and although the website doesn't really catch your eye, once you download it, it's pretty robust. It allows you to have more control over the game rather than just the build and run in GB Studio itself. I think you can change how the game is displayed while you're playing it. You can, you know, switch between devices, so you can see what it would look like on or how it would even play like on a color device compared to the original. And this saves so much time if you wanted to actually test it on a cartridge on a device. It would obviously take a lot of time. However, you have to be aware that doing it in emulation, there might be subtle differences between the actual hardware. The main thing I use this for is for testing out color palettes. It lets you change the basic colors of the game as you're playing it. So by playing around with the colors, you can more easily get a feel for what colors you might want in your game. So different emulators might have more or less features, but being able to play your library of games on your desktop is invaluable. So still at number 8, before we move on, I want to talk about flash carts. And by exporting your game as a ROM, you can get your game onto a physical cartridge by using an SD card cartridge, or by flashing your game onto a flashable cartridge using a flasher. This GB Studio Central article helped me to get started, knowing which products are out there. And using this info and obviously my own research, I managed to get my own cartridge out there, so you can buy Ticket Racing 2 on cartridge from my website, robertdoman.co.uk. So still at number 8, with the idea of flash carts, the GB operator I'm classing as an emulator. It gives your computer a cartridge slot, and you can play your own cartridge games with it just like you would an emulator. It can also act as a flasher and even detect counterfeit games. So yeah, emulation and the GB operator are a great way to play your Game Boy games. But as we go up the list, we're going to be moving towards the more classic retro fundamentals of the Game Boy. So at number 7, we have the Nintendo consoles that support Game Boy games with adapters, such as the Super Game Boy or the Super Game Boy 2 for the SNES, the GameCube Game Boy player. And actually something I didn't realize about the Super Game Boy is that actually the SNES couldn't like play Game Boy games. So this cartridge is actually has a Game Boy inside. That's how it works, which is kind of cool. So yeah, these consoles that you can play the Game Boy on are a great and tactile way of connecting to your games. Being able to see them in a large format on the TV is great, and having a controller in your hand so you can press buttons is completely a unique feeling. And also having the SNES or GameCube also gives you the possibility of playing and getting inspired by a whole new library of games. So it's definitely worth considering, and having another console in your repertoire is kind of cool as well. So at number 6, we're finally jumping into handheld, starting with the Game Boy Pocket. It was released in 1996, and it's a smaller and lighter version of the Game Boy. It takes 2 AAAs rather than 4 AA batteries, and it used a black and white display and reduced sprite blurring, which is fantastic. But I also want to add the Game Boy Light to number 6. That one features a backlit screen, arguably making it the ultimate way to play the official non-color Game Boy games, especially if you like playing at night. Holding a classic console like this has so much of a more powerful retro feeling when it's your game on the screen. I can't emphasize that much. Seeing your own creation moving around on the screen is just unparalleled. At number 5, we have the Game Boy Color. Obviously a step up from the Pocket and the Light. The Color is actually more powerful, but it isn't backlit. Released in 1998, it plays both original Game Boy games and Game Boy Color games, so you can play any game you make in GB Studio on this device. The full color was a huge step up from the Game Boy, allowing 56 colors on the screen simultaneously, bringing games to life. Despite not being as powerful as other consoles on the market at the time, it dominated with its large game library and strong brand recognition. And if you don't have a Game Boy Color in your collection, I think you need one now. For me, the Game Boy Color is perfect because it's much less chunky and heavy than the original. It's definitely got a more of a form factor with the little, you know, bulging battery cover. It's just nice that it comes in other colors as well. At number 4, we have the Game Boy Advance. I'm going to be focusing on the Game Boy Advance SP because this one's my favorite, but I also include the Game Boy Micro in this number, at number 4. With a lit screen, it's honestly my favorite to use when I'm testing games because it doesn't need batteries. I can just charge it up and I can just have it ready for when I need it next. I don't have to worry about the batteries running out, the batteries corroding, you know, losing batteries, finding batteries. Not having to worry about batteries is nice. And obviously the fact it's lit means that I can play it in bad lighting conditions. Mine's the front lit one, so obviously it's maybe doesn't look as good as the backlit one. I don't have the backlit one, so I don't know. And the fact that by having this device, you have access to the whole Game Boy Advance library as well, that's amazing. I also find the button presses a lot more satisfying. With the Game Boy Color, they are a bit like loose and squishy, but with the Game Boy Advance, you can feel that you're, you know, clicking them, which means that you don't end up breaking the buttons. I feel like the buttons get worn out on the other Game Boys because you don't know if you're actually pressing it down fully. And I've had Game Boys in the past where the buttons stick, or they don't. You're pressing it down all the way, it feels like, but then the button in the game isn't being pressed. So by having the tactile feedback on the SP's buttons, love it. I also really like the flip shut. Unfortunately, I've actually misplaced my SP right now. I think it's on my desk somewhere under or something, so I can't show you, but I do like the sound of the clipping closed. Yeah, I just think that's really fun, and I'm obviously the fact that the DS kind of copied it, I don't blame it at all. So now we're down to the top 3, and first of all we have the Analogue Pocket. This is a modern retelling of the Game Boy, and you can play Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and Game Boy Advance games. You can also play and test GB Studio games very easily by exporting your game as a .pocket file, and then using the SD card in the Analogue Pocket to then just plug and play your games. And then using adapters, you can also play Game Gear games, Neo Geo Pocket Color games, and Atari Lynx games, and apparently more. The Analogue Pocket boasts that it doesn't actually emulate games and instead uses 2 FPGA chips, so it's as if you are actually playing a Game Boy. The Analogue also gives you the power to make music with its built-in digital audio workstation called Nanoloop. And with a beautiful high-resolution LCD screen, you're actually able to adjust different graphical settings to visually change how the games are displayed. For example, you can make it look like that classic pea soup of the original Game Boy, or you can make it look more clear like a modern screen. And then finally, docking the console like a Switch also lets you play it on the big screen. So this is the ultimate brand new retro handheld experience. However, it's quite expensive, I believe. So that's why above it at number 2, I have the classic, the original, the GameBoy DMG. Its pea soup dot matrix grid screen is infamous around the world. If you're a fan of Game Boys, there's nothing like seeing your game on this screen. Famously, this 8-bit system was out of date when it was released, but that didn't hold it back from selling millions and becoming a cultural icon. The console should remind you as a developer that the best things about games aren't how much they cost, it's not how powerful they are or how advanced the graphics are, it's simply about fun. And the Game Boy is exactly that. Being able to develop games for this device with GB Studio is so special. I really hope that you understand how lucky we are that we get to use GB Studio and make Game Boy games so easily. If you don't already have a Game Boy, I really hope you consider getting one of these originals, as it's made me appreciate the work of the original developers of Game Boy games and what they had to do to lay the foundations that we take for granted in our game design today. And although I said it was chunky and obviously the pea soup, the blurring, you can't see anything, you know, sometimes, it is endearing, and knowing that it was made in 1989 is special to me. So finally, at number 1, the best way to play your own homebrew Game Boy games is on a modified Game Boy. Just like this one here. It's got a backlit screen. Already, it's a step up from the original Game Boy. But the reason I've put this at the top of the list is because I want you to modify your Game Boy yourself. I want you to take it apart and understand what you're actually working with when you make your games, because it's a whole new world beyond our laptop screens, our phone screens, our PC screens, into electrical engineering and the connection to gaming through our fingertips. So there's loads of modifications you can make and find to improve the Game Boy, like I said, like the backlit screen. And I really believe that like forming this extra bond with the device makes it more special to see your game on its screen. I also believe that it will help inspire you to keep making games, to understand why you want to make games. And it should help inform your design decisions, understanding more about the Game Boy, of its limitations, of its history, and it gets us closer to what it might have been like to be a designer and a developer for Nintendo in 1989. And obviously behind me here I have the Retro Future. He has some great videos on modifying Game Boys. It makes it fun, and he also is very useful and informative. So definitely check him out if you want to modify your own Game Boys. But there is tons of information out there online. So definitely dive in, get started, get creative, get destructive. I want to see what you make. So thank you so much for sticking with me to the end there. I hope you enjoyed this list, and I hope it's inspired you to think more about your game development journey. So I'll put my patrons up on screen right now. Thank you so much, you guys. You guys are the absolute best. I want to thank again Caracol Games for getting Take It Racing 2 onto the Switch. And Caracol Games have told me that if you want your game on the Switch, you should also go talk to them. They might be able to help you get your game on the Switch just like they did me. Thank you so much for watching. Did you agree with my list? Did I miss a way of playing your own Game Boy games? How would you have structured this list? Would you have put Modified Game Boys at the top, or would maybe have you put the GB operator at the top? I'd like to hear what you thought about this list in the comments below. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.